Everyone laughed when the Omega chose a servant, until he revealed the Alpha King's golden eyes. The great hall of Velmore Castle had never been so full. Every noble family in the kingdom had gathered beneath its towering stone arches, dressed in silk and fur, to witness a moment that came only once in a generation. An Omega of the rarest bloodline, one born with the gift of true recognition, had come of age. Tonight he would choose his mate. His name was Elior, and he stood at the center of the hall in a simple white robe, his dark hair falling loosely over his shoulders. He did not wear jewels. He did not need them. Everyone in the room knew what he was and what he represented. An Omega like him appeared only once every few generations, and it was said that such an Omega could sense the truth of a person's heart and blood simply by being near them. Kings had married such Omegas in the old days. Empires had been built on their choices. Along the sides of the hall stood the Alphas who had come to compete for his hand. Dukes, generals, lords with ancient names, and at the very front, dressed in deep crimson and gold, stood Prince Adrian, heir to the throne, his jaw set with the confidence of a man who had never once doubted that he would win. The herald raised his staff and struck it against the marble floor 3 times. The sound echoed through the silent hall. "Let the chosen Omega step forward and select his mate," the herald announced. Elior lifted his chin. His eyes, calm and steady, swept across the room. He looked at the prince, he looked at the dukes, he looked at every powerful man gathered to win his favor, and then he began to walk, not toward the prince, not toward any noble at all. He walked past them all, his soft footsteps the only sound in the frozen hall, until he reached the far wall where the servants stood with trays of wine and bowls of water, waiting to be called upon should any guest require refreshment. There, half hidden behind a pillar, stood a young man in a plain grey tunic, his head bowed low, his hands rough and stained, from years of cleaning the stables. His name was Kyle. Elior stopped in front of him, and then, to the horror and disbelief of everyone watching, the rare Omega knelt. For a moment, the hall did not breathe. Then the laughter began. It started as a low chuckle from one of the dukes, then spread like fire through dry grass. Within seconds, the entire hall was roaring with amusement. Nobles clutched their sides. Ladies hid their smiles behind painted fans. Prince Adrian's face twisted first with confusion, then with fury, and finally with contempt. "He has lost his mind," someone called out. "The stable boy. He chose the stable boy? What a waste," another noble sneered. "A treasure like that, thrown away on a servant who cannot even look a lord in the eye." Cale's face burned red. He had spent his whole life trying to remain invisible, to do his work quietly, and avoid the attention of the powerful. He knew the law. Servants were forbidden from courting anyone above their station, and to accept an Omega's choice when he had no rank at all could be seen as a crime against the court itself. He could be whipped for this. He could be executed. "Please," Cale whispered, his voice trembling as he tried to step back. "My Lord Omega, you must be mistaken. I am nobody. I clean stables. I carry water. I am not worthy of this." But Elior did not rise. He remained kneeling, his eyes fixed steadily on Cale's downturned face. "I am not mistaken," Elior said quietly, though his voice carried through the hall with unexpected strength. "I have searched for a long time to find you." The laughter faltered for just a moment, confusion flickering across the nobles' faces, before someone called out again, mocking, and the room dissolved once more into cruel amusement. Cale shook his head, panic rising in his chest. He reached out, not to accept Elior's hand, but to gently push it away, to save them both from what he was certain would end in disaster. "Please, stand," Cale begged. "I cannot accept this. I do not want the court to hurt you because of me." As he leaned forward, desperate and afraid, his worn hood slipped back from his head, and for the first time in years, his eyes were fully visible beneath the candlelight of the great hall. They were gold, not the warm brown that most in the kingdom carried, not the pale hazel of the noble families, but a deep, unmistakable gold, the exact color spoken of only in old stories and forbidden histories. The color of the Alpha King's bloodline, the bloodline that had supposedly ended 20 years ago, the night the old king and his family were said to have perished in a fire that swept through the northern palace. The laughter stopped. An elderly duke near the front of the hall rose slowly from his seat, his hand trembling as he pointed toward Kale. "Those eyes," he whispered, though in the silence his voice carried to every corner of the room. "By the old gods, those are the king's eyes." Several of the older guards standing along the walls, men who had served the crown for decades, dropped instinctively to one knee, a gesture buried so deep in their training that their bodies moved before their minds could stop them. They caught themselves quickly, glancing nervously toward Prince Adrian and his father, King Doran, who sat upon the raised throne at the end of the hall, his face suddenly pale as parchment. "Impossible," King Doran said, his voice tight. The old king's line ended the night of the fire. There were no survivors. But even as he said it, his eyes did not leave Kale's face, and something in his expression, something close to fear, told a different story. Elior rose to his feet at last, standing beside Kale, who looked around the hall in complete bewilderment, his hands shaking at his sides. "I did not choose you by accident," Elior said, turning to face Kale directly. "I have spent the last several months traveling through the lower quarters of this kingdom, disguised as a common Omega seeking work, searching for someone. My gift allows me to sense truth that others cannot see. Bloodlines, loyalties, the truth hidden beneath a person's skin. I was told by an old healer, one who served the true king many years ago, that the heir did not die in the fire, that he was smuggled out as a small child and hidden among the common people, where no one would think to look for him." Kale's breathing grew shallow. "That cannot be me," he said. "I have no family. I was left at the stable gates as a baby. The stable master raised me because no one else would." "That is exactly what I was told to expect," Elior said gently. "كل يوم يمنحك فرصة جديدة لتصبح نسخة أفضل من نفسك. I did not choose you because of pity, Kale. Kale, I chose you because I recognized you. The moment I felt your presence in this hall, even before I saw your eyes, I knew who you were." Whispers spread rapidly through the crowd, nobles turning to one another in shock, some already recalculating the position they wished to hold in a court whose future had suddenly become uncertain. King Doran stood abruptly from his throne. "This is nonsense," he said, his voice sharp with an edge of desperation that had not been there moments before. "A servant boy with unusual eyes proves nothing. Guards, remove him from the hall at once, along with the Omega who has clearly lost his senses." Several guards stepped forward, but others hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. The old duke, who had first recognized Kale's eyes, stepped between the guards and the young couple, his back straight despite his age. "Your Majesty," the duke said carefully, "if there is even a possibility that the true heir stands among us, then removing him without proper inquiry would be a grave violation of the old laws. The court owes him, at the very least, the right to be examined." King Doran's jaw tightened, but the murmurs of agreement rippling through the assembled nobles made it clear that he could not simply dismiss the moment with a wave of his hand. Too many people had seen the guards kneel. Too many had heard the old duke speak the words aloud. Examined how? The king demanded. "The old law," the duke replied, "requires two proofs for any claim to the royal bloodline: the eyes, which we have already witnessed, and the mark, carried on the wrist of every child born into the line, given by the healers at birth, as a hidden safeguard against exactly this kind of uncertainty." All eyes turned to Kale. His hands trembled as he looked down at his own wrist, at the faint scar he had carried his entire life and never understood, a thin crescent shape just below his palm that the stable master had always dismissed as an old injury from childhood. Slowly, Kale pulled back his sleeve and turned his wrist toward the light. The mark was there, pale and thin, but unmistakably shaped like a crescent moon, exactly as the old law described. The hall fell into stunned silence once more. "It cannot be," King Doran whispered, sinking back into his throne, all color draining from his face. Elior stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying clearly through the frozen hall. "There is more the court should know," he said. "During my search, I did not travel alone. I gathered witnesses along the way, servants and healers who remembered the night of the fire, who remembered a guard being paid to look away as a small child was carried out through a side gate. I have brought 3 of them here tonight, hidden among the servants in this very hall, waiting only for the right moment to speak. 3 figures stepped forward from among the servants standing near the walls, their heads no longer bowed, an old healer, a former guard now well into his later years, and a woman who had once worked in the northern palace kitchens. One by one, they spoke, their voices steady despite the weight of what they revealed. They confirmed the fire had been set deliberately. They confirmed a child had been smuggled away that same night. They confirmed that King Doran's own father, the one who had claimed the throne after the fire, had known the truth and buried it to protect his family's claim to power. King Doran said nothing. There was nothing left for him to say. The truth, once hidden for 20 years, had finally found its way into the light, carried not by soldiers or armies, but by a quiet Omega who had searched for months to find one lost boy with golden eyes. The old duke turned to face the hall. By the ancient law of blood and mark, he announced, I recognize Kale, once believed lost, as the rightful heir to the throne of this kingdom. One by one, the guards who had hesitated earlier now knelt fully, without shame or fear, joined slowly by nobles who only moments before had laughed at Elior's choice. The sound of silk gowns and armored knees meeting stone floor filled the hall, a sound entirely different from the laughter that had greeted them at the start of the evening. Kale stood frozen for a long moment, overwhelmed by the weight of what was happening around him. He looked at Elior, searching his face for some sign of what he should do next. You do not have to be afraid anymore, Elior said softly, taking Kale's hand in his own. You were never truly a servant. You were only waiting to be seen. Kale's eyes filled with tears he had held back his entire life. Tears for the boy who had scrubbed stable floors without knowing his own name, for the years spent believing he belonged nowhere, for the quiet ache of always standing at the edges of rooms he was never meant to enter. I do not know how to be a king, he admitted quietly. Then we will learn together, Elior answered. I did not choose a crown tonight. I chose you. Whatever comes after, we will face it side by side. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom slowly came to accept what the great hall had witnessed that night. King Doran, unable to deny the evidence gathered against him, stepped aside quietly, his family's claim to the throne dissolved by the truth that could no longer be hidden. Cal was crowned in a small, simple ceremony, choosing not the grand spectacle his predecessors had favored, but a quiet gathering that included the very servants he had once worked beside, each of them treated with a respect he had never received himself. Elior stood beside him throughout it all, no longer mocked for his choice, but honored as the Omega whose instinct had restored a broken kingdom to its rightful path. The same nobles who had laughed loudest on that first night were often the first to bow lowest whenever the new king and his Omega passed through the halls, though Kale never asked for such treatment, and often seemed uncomfortable receiving it. Late one evening, months after the ceremony, Kale found himself standing once again near the stables where he had spent so many years of his life, watching the horses settle for the night. Elior joined him quietly, resting a hand on his shoulder. Do you ever miss it? Elior asked. The simple work, the quiet life. Kale considered the question for a long moment before answering. Sometimes, he admitted, but I do not miss feeling invisible. I do not miss believing I was nobody. You were never nobody, Elior said. You simply had not yet been found. Kale turned to look at him, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through the weight of everything he had carried. Then I am glad it was you who found me. Above them, the stars scattered across the night sky, indifferent to kingdoms and crowns, but the 2 men standing quietly beneath them understood something the rest of the court had only just begun to learn. True worth was never about the title a person wore or the room they were allowed to enter. It was something recognized, patiently and honestly, by those willing to look past the surface and see what had been there all along.